Inspire with Nendrix, the foundation.
Hello, and welcome back to Your Best Life with Dr. Hairston, founder and president of Embracing Arms Incorporated and the brand movement hashtag Your Best Life. Thank you for joining us as we begin a new series, which is very special to me as I celebrate what would be my mother's 70th birthday. My mother, Trooper Darthinia Hairston, better known to most as Spicy, was a retired Pennsylvania State Police officer before passing in August of 2009. She started her career with the state police in 1980 when I was just 7 years old, which was about 9 years after the first female cadets were welcomed to the academy. So I spent most of my life being raised and mentored by law enforcement officers and have grown to love and respect all of them, all law enforcement officials, particularly Pennsylvania state troopers, where I had most of my surrogate fathers and mothers coming through the ranks. And I've always been fascinated and intrigued specifically by women who chose this career, as I know all too well some of the trials and tribulations of navigating this white male-dominated sector as a female, specifically as an African American female. Now, this is part one of Women and Badges, where I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing women from all over the country and from various law enforcement sectors about their experience as a law enforcement officer and reflecting on their perceptions of the culture, recruitment, retention, promotion of women in this sector. Now, y'all already know my first guest. Y'all saw the flyers. Y'all already know what's going on. She don't really need any introduction, but for those of y'all who have been, living in a cave on a desert island or social distancing for the past 20 years, I'm going to do you a favor and introduce you to this wonderful woman. Her name is Kristal Turner Childs, and she is a major with the Pennsylvania State Police and has been achieving success in her career for 22 years. She distinguished herself as the first African-American female to command a troop and the second African-American female to obtain the rank of major in the 114-year history of the Pennsylvania State Police, making her the highest ranking African-American Pennsylvania State Police as a female. She has a master's degree in organizational leadership from Central Penn College, graduate of the Northwestern School of Police Staff and Command and the FBI National Academy, and she is a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She is a godmother and auntie to many and a community advocate. She is also a group fitness instructor and the founder and president of Eyes Wide Open LLC, with a mission to empower women to take charge of not only their spiritual health, but their physical and mental health. So I just want to welcome Major Kristal Turner Childs. It is my honor and a pleasure to have you join me here today. How are you?
I am great. It is so wonderful to be here and to see you. It seems like forever since you left us here in Pennsylvania, but whenever we get to connect, it feels like we're right back where we left off. So
right. I get so excited. You know me, like every time I see Major Turner Childs achieve a new milestone, I don't care what it is. I don't care if she, lost a quarter of a pound. I'm like, yo, did you see that? Like, I will post, I will lift her up because I just think she's amazing. Of course, given the fact it doesn't, it helps a little bit that we Star Wars too, right? But I really believe that if you know her, you already know the energy that she puts out, and she surrounds herself by the same energy that she puts out. So the energy that I give her is equal to the energy that she gives me and people in the community. So I'm just blessed to have you joining me today. Now, I just gave them a little bit. I just gave them a little bit of who you are, right? Just a little bit. Yeah, that was just a little bit, audience. So I'm gonna turn it over to her real quick so that she can give you a little bit more about who she is, maybe something that we don't know, about her experience and why she chose to become a police officer.
Wow. So I grew up in North Carolina in a small town called Mocksville. It's probably 25 minutes from Winston-Salem, for those of you that don't know the area. we grew up very poor, dirt poor, red dirt. That's what I call it. I call it the red dirt capital. And I remember staying with my grandmother in a wood house that sat up on bricks. And so we came up in humble beginnings. But I've always had this passion for service. You know, I've always been that person that would give you most of what I had, if not all of what I had, to ensure that you were better. That's just the heart that I have. And so when I actually moved to New York for a little while with my aunt, because, you know, it's coming up. It was a village when we were coming up. So because we didn't have a lot of money, my mother sent me with my aunt to live in New York for a little while in the Bronx. Mm-hmm. And so I had that culture of the urban area, and I loved the Bronx, but still maintained that spirit of service. I remember having a friend, a young Spanish friend. We went to PS 19 at that time, and we were best friends, and I used to run down to her house, and unfortunately, she was killed at a very young age. So I saw the horrors of crime at a very young age. And so losing her friendship and seeing her death sparked something inside of me. And at the time, I didn't even know what it was. I moved to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania with my mother not long after that. And we lived right on for those of you that don't know Harrisburg, I lived on the Hill. And so the Hill area, you know, definitely working class. My stepfather was in construction. My mother worked. And I remember there was a fight going on up the street. And if you're young like us, when you see a fight, you don't run from it, you run to it, because you want to see, you want to see what's going on with the fight. So I ran up to the fight, and when I got there was a young man that had got hit with something, and he's laying on the ground, his head's cracked open, and there's blood just trickling down the asphalt, the black asphalt. I'll never forget it. And immediately, I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran back home. We didn't have cell phones.
Right.
I ran home and got on the phone and dialed 911. Ambulance, police come. And at the time, you know, I just thought that was just the right thing to do. I did not realize that when you dial 911, an officer has a duty to go to the point of origin of the call. Well, y'all, I didn't tell my mom that I was using her phone. So I was scared. You know, I was like, oh, Lord, she's going to find out I messed with her phone. I didn't ask for permission. Officer comes to the house and asks who called 911. I'm standing there. And my mom's like, did you die? I said, yes. And the officer came over to me. It was a Harrisburg police officer. And he says, young lady, you did a good thing. You probably saved that young man's life today. Wow. Because you acted quickly and called 911. And that's when I was bitten. I said, you know, I want to do what he does. It just made me feel so great. I felt 10 feet tall. And to have somebody recognize you that you probably saved for someone's life, that's what I wanted to be able to instill in other people. So here I am.
That's awesome. So did you think, you know, I mean, you saw the male officer come to your home, and probably many of those that responded to the call were male. Like, what made you think, like, you know, I see these men, but I think I can do this. I can. Was there any hesitation?
No, the fact that he was male, I didn't even see male. What I saw was uniform and presence, and the fact that he gave me accolades and told me I did a good job. That's what I saw.
Okay. Well, you know, I read an article that was published by the National Center of Women in Policing, right? This was an article that was published in 1980, the same year that my mom became an officer, and for the Pennsylvania State Police. And the article outlined some of the top concerns of female officers. And those top concerns that came up was like sexual harassment, unfair promotional practices, and issues related to like starting families and pregnancy, right? So that was, you know, almost little over 40 years ago, this article was published. How have the representation and experiences of women in policing changed, in your opinion, over the past 40 years?
Wow. So let's start. I'm going to start with some positive things. Positive things are, there are a lot of, not a lot, but a lot more women that have become police chiefs, especially in municipal police agencies, small police agencies. Unfortunately, only one female, that's Delaware State Police, has become a police commissioner in a state police agency.
Wow.
Maybe California, but I do know Delaware has a state police commissioner. So we are achieving chief status or commissioner status.
Mm-hmm.
The other things that's changed, in my opinion, there are things in place now that allow you to report sexual harassment and things like that. And the other thing is, when we were first hired, women were hired to basically be, I hate to use this, but type of babysitters. We were hired because the men were having, in domestic situations, men were having difficulty interacting with the women in the household. So women were hired so that we could go and basically bridge that gap. We were hired to go talk to women in domestic situations and to deal with the children. We weren't necessarily hired to go out and be out there on the streets arresting people. We were more so hired to come in and do work where we're actually bridging the gap so that the male officer could effect an arrest.
All right. You know, and that's interesting because I did read in that same article, they were saying how, as they were talking about the benefits of bringing women into the force, they were saying that women were coming in as a bit of a calm, right? That whenever you would pair officers together with a female officer, the level of violence that happened would decrease. And so they saw that there was great benefits. I mean, there was levels of benefits, but that was the one that kind of struck me as interesting because I didn't know that, you know, before reading that article.
And that is still a benefit today.
Mm-hmm.
When you hire more women in your law enforcement agencies, your use of force complaints, your use of force actions are going to decrease. Because women have this wonderful innate ability to relate, to communicate in a way that de-escalates violent situations.
Absolutely. That's great. I mean, that was part of some of my questioning. So I'm glad that you brought it up because it made it easier for us to kind of talk about that. So in that same article, so in the article that I actually referred to earlier, right, back in 1980, and I specifically chose that article because I wanted to find out what they were writing about women when my mother became a police officer, and it suggested that the presence of women could bring about significant beneficial changes in policy. And now we fast forward it to just last year in an article that was published by the National Institute of Justice. It suggests, you know, basically the same thing. It's like 40 years later, they're like, yo, we've been talking about this, we've been writing about this, we've been researching about this for 40 years. In fact, it shares that women can have a significant impact on community policing and overall morale of law enforcement officers across the country. But it seems like, despite the fact that we're writing about this, you know, over and over again, over the past 40 years plus, that not much movement had been made to fully embrace that implication. What role do you think men can and have played in improving the representation of experiences of women in policing?
Well, first of all, let me say this. I think that the reason why that we haven't gained the traction and why, you know, because as you were speaking about this article, I was thinking to myself, have the men read it? Because it was generated from women in policing. Okay. So have men read this article? Let me say this. Men can play a vital role in women becoming and rising in the ranks in law enforcement entities. And here's what men can do. Men can mentor, okay? Men can vouch for those women that they work alongside of and say, hey, she can do this job. Because we're going into male-dominated roles. When I became a Pennsylvania State Trooper, I can remember when I was a cadet, a male, he was at the time, he was a trooper, he was asking another trooper about me, how I was doing in the academy. This male trooper said, oh, she's a F up. That's what he said. Those were his words.
Wow.
Now, had my friend believed him, then he probably would have written me off and never checked on me again.
Right.
But how many females go through and get that same type of stigma, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then people just write them off or don't even give them an opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
My friend decided, nah, I don't believe him. I know better. She comes from good stock. Let me always make sure that she's okay, and help to mentor me and help me when I got out of the academy.
Right.
We have to get away. This is another thing men can do. We have to get away from this thing where we have to be, it used to be a time that when you wanted to become a trooper, you had to be 5'10" and 180 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
We got to they erased those. They erased all of those. You don't have to have a height requirement. You don't have to have a weight requirement. Men can get out there and promote the fact that women have a unique and innate ability to be great communicators. I'll be honest with you, I've talked more people in handcuffs than I ever did putting my hands on them physically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have that ability. We also have the ability, the cognitive faculty, to be able to analyze things and not necessarily escalate situations. So we're hearing, we're listening, we're analyzing conversations. And people actually feel like they're being heard when we show up and we arrive at scenes. Mm-hmm. How many times, how many videos, how many, we could pull our phones up now where it feels like people don't feel like they're being heard. Yeah. A lot of times, if people just feel like you hear them, situations de-escalate. Yeah. Men can help with that. You all are 90% of police forces, men. Mm-hmm. You could do so much, and we would be greatly appreciative if you would.
Right, that's something, and it's so much more. I think, if they had read the article, and we hope that they do, and we hope maybe after they watch this segment, that, because I'll have a link to that report, in this. You can find it below. But I definitely hope that they take the time to read it, because while we know that men hold a huge space in law enforcement, I don't think they recognize the power that they have in changing the narrative of how people view women and women's value in this particular field.
And they have the absolute power. Let me say this. As I was moving through the ranks of the Pennsylvania State Police, I encountered some absolutely fabulous male role models. Mm-hmm. When I was working on studying for promotion exams, when I was seeking advice about taking a position or where I should try to line my career path up, I had wonderful role models that were men. And I am eternally grateful to those men. And I call them from time to time. They've all retired, but I call them from time to time just to still seek out advice and bounce ideas off of. Mm. Then you can take the lead on this, as far as having women move up, our numbers to increase, and to put us in positions where we are making decisions about how law enforcement agencies move forward.
Absolutely. And those mentors are probably my surrogate daddies. So we could probably list out who they, because we have a whole lot of them.
Feelings, but we could run their names, but you know who I'm talking about.
Exactly. Well, what in your opinion, because we know that, there have been cases where in the office, in this space, in, law enforcement space where you are working as well, not just officers, but also women civilians, that they've had experience in toxic workplace, right? Sometimes we forget that there are civilians that work in those spaces that's dealing with the same thing. What in your opinion makes a law enforcement environment toxic for women and women civilian officers and women who are civilians working in the law enforcement office?
I think what makes an environment toxic is when you do not have regulations, rules that are set in place that are for everyone. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm going to talk about my bureau. I work in the Bureau of Forensic Services. And so I don't have as many women. I have civilians and I have enlisted. So sworn members, and then I have civilians, because we work in a forensic lab. Mm-hmm. But everybody in there knows that we treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of race, gender, or anything, you know. So when you come into my agency, I do not tolerate, and that's a leadership thing. It has to start from the top down. It's a leadership thing. So everybody knows that how I treat my people, I expect them to treat me as well as everyone else. And I hold you accountable. And so if I encounter a situation where someone feels as if they're harassed or there's discriminatory practices, we're going to do an investigation, and we're going to determine if that is occurring. If it is, then we will look into how we handle that from a administrative type of standpoint. But everyone knows, and again, it starts from leadership. I am very passionate about ensuring that my people are good, that they're okay each and every day. So when I come to work, I'm talking to my people, I'm interacting with them, I'm asking them about their families, especially since this whole COVID situation has been going on. I send emails, I want to know how you're doing it. And I think it's infectious. I think that type of thing is moving down to my directors, and then to my managers, and all the way down to my first line supervisors, that they are really concerned about the well-being of one another. Again, if we start off not having good rules and regulations, and then the leadership that ensures that those rules and regulations are followed, because none of us are above it, that ensures that we keep the toxicity out of the agencies. I can't say we're going to do it 100%, but then that falls on the person that is feeling as if it's toxic to let us know and hold me accountable.
Right, absolutely.
I tell my people, it's just as important for you to hold me accountable as it is for me to hold you accountable. Because I can't do this by myself. I can't be everywhere. So if something's happening that you feel like I should know and I don't know about, make sure that I know. I don't permit areas where people don't feel like they can connect with me. I tell everybody, you can email me directly. I will not be offended. I will not go to your supervisor and say that you emailed me directly, because I understand that sometimes you don't feel comfortable speaking to your supervisor, and it needs to get around, and it needs to get where it needs to go. Send me the email.
Right.
All of my directors, managers, supervisors know. Right. Anybody can email me. If you see me moving around in the buildings or outside of the buildings and you need to talk to me, come and talk to me. Everybody has access to my phone number as well. I think it's important for leadership to be transparent in those ways, because if we don't do those things, people feel like they just can't get the word out, that they're bottled up and they're not able to be understood, or let's go back to it, circle right back to be heard.
Yes. And then, I share that sentiment. I think that's why you and I jive so well when we're having conversations about leadership and, really supporting our staff, especially when COVID hit. Like, you and I were kind of just communicating back and forth about how we were going to connect with our colleagues and make sure that they are heard, and just, feeling the safety of knowing that your leadership is going to listen to you, feeling the safety that knowing that you can approach your leadership without any retribution, and then knowing that your leadership is going to advocate for you. They're going to make sure that policies are put in place that everyone has to abide by, not just because it's gender specific, that everyone is following those. And you're going to hold me. I'm going to be open and okay with you holding me accountable, as well as you being open and okay with being held accountable. I think that that's a wonderful balance and an amazing practice to put in place if you want to reduce the toxicity in a work environment. So thank you for that. I appreciate your leadership. If no one's told you today, I'm going to tell you. And one of the things that I do remember clearly about my mother's experience as a police officer is that she would tell us how uniquely difficult it was for her, because she was not only battling people outside of the office, but she was also battling within the office. And so often she didn't feel protected no matter what. And it also, I believe, influenced her decision not to seek out opportunities to rank or compete for promotional opportunities. To what extent are women deterred from taking certain assignments and positions? And to what extent are the potential contributions of women in certain assignments or positions diminished?
Yeah, great question. So listen, it still happens today where women that come into the law enforcement profession are geared or steered to certain areas in law enforcement that aren't necessarily operational. So what do I mean by that? They're geared to the public information jobs. Nothing wrong with that. I did public information work for a little bit. They're geared to recruiters or community service jobs. Nothing wrong with those. I did some of those too. Right. But let's remember that when we signed up to become police officers, we signed up for the whole job. Okay. We didn't just sign up for these small segments. Now, if you certainly get into those segments and you like it, that's great. But what happens is when you don't diversify, especially for women, when you don't diversify your resume, people tend to pigeonhole women into, oh, she's not a good leader. She hasn't supervised field operations. She hasn't done anything with an operational segment. And so she can't certainly be a leader. So we won't consider her for supervision. Those are the things that happen to women. So if you're looking at, hey, I want to move over into, maybe it's a drug law, or you want to move into, you might want to be a hostage negotiator. You know, sometimes when they're looking at the write-up or the resumes for those, they're looking for you to have some sort of crime experience, some sort of experience where you have actually dealt in hostage negotiation. Well, you don't get those type of experiences if you're moving into a recruitment or a segment of the organization that is not operations. Okay. And we, unfortunately, if we don't have good mentors, nobody tells us these things. Right. And we get into that, we think we get into these positions and we're like, oh, we're doing a great job because people are telling us we're doing a great job. And then 5, 8, 9, 10 years down the road, you decide you want to change. And you're like, oh my gosh, I have to go back and get experience in these other places. And it's difficult to do that. Right. It's very difficult to do those things.
Wow.
So it's imperative, men, I'm coming back to you. It's imperative, okay, that when we are supervising men, when you're supervising women, don't automatically assume that they're good for areas that are not operationally, don't have an operational segment. Consider them for everything. And if they happen to enjoy doing that, that's great. Right. But don't just assume that just because she's female, we're going to put her in an area that's not an operational segment.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. I remember, preparing myself for a career change. One of my mentors, who was a male, had said to me, listen, when you get offered the salary, I'm gonna need you to negotiate. Women tend to not negotiate their salary. I'm gonna need you to negotiate, and I'm gonna need you to negotiate this way. And I want you to ask this question and that question and ask for this. And as a woman, I don't know if it was from a woman's perspective or just a scary old me perspective, but I was like, oh, wait, I don't know if I want to negotiate. What if I lose the opportunity? And one of the things, that he kept pushing was that women tend not to negotiate. They tend not to push back. Men tend to be that person that's like negotiating those salaries and pushing back. And as my mentor, he's like, no, I'm going to tell you what I do. And I'm going to tell you that it's going to work for you. And reluctantly, I negotiated and it worked, right? And I'm like, oh, this is great. So when you start talking about those people who have been privileged to be in these spaces that they can do things like negotiate their salary or be in those spaces where they can rank, it's like a no-brainer. I'm going to put you here. I'm going to recommend that you do this. And they have those opportunities as a man. Yes, if you see that there's an opportunity, that there's some quality colleagues around you or quality other female police officers around you, coach them to understanding exactly what they need to do to reposition themselves for these opportunities. So I definitely agree with that. So
say this real quickly. Your mother was a trailblazer. Maybe not a lot of people know this, but she was the first female MIGSAP inspector, which is a truck inspector, which is huge. I mean, no woman, and now we have, I think, two, but no woman at the time when your mother was on the job was out there actually inspecting commercial vehicles. I mean, the knowledge and the traffic enforcement knowledge that she had to have at that time is mind-boggling, because some of us know enough to pull over a commercial vehicle, and we might know a few violations, but the violations they know to inspect the entire vehicle, to weigh it, to know what they're carrying, the hazardous vehicle placards, all those things. She was a trailblazer.
Listen,
so I'm happy to know her. I just want everybody to know that. I'm a history person. So people I encounter, I like to know who they are, what they are, and how they impacted the
That's wonderful. And you know what? Until you just said that, I didn't know that. I remember my mom going to this class, like taking this intensive course for the CDL thingy. Like, I just remember her going away. She had to travel somewhere to do it. And I was like, why are you doing that? Like, what is this? Like, because for me, I'm like, don't men do this? But I distinctly remember her going through this intense training to be able to do that. But I thank you for that. Look at that. Look at what you learned.
Look up to how long it takes to become MIGSAP certified, MCSAP, and you will be surprised at how much work she put in.
Wow. Well, look at the pearl I'm learning. I'm so glad to know that. Well, thank you. What advice would you give women who are interested in entering law enforcement as it relates to mental preparedness and mentorship? Because we know we need more women in law enforcement. We know that we represent less than 15% across the country. I read, and I think I shared with you, that Madison, Wisconsin has like the largest percentage of female officers across the country, comparative. And I'm like, what? I had no clue. So we know that we want to do more of that, and we want to figure out what best practices to put in place so that we can get more women in these positions. But what advice would you give women who's interested, don't know next steps, and helping them to prepare mentally for that? I'm
going to tell you some of the things I did when I was trying to get into Pennsylvania State Police is, first, read up on the organization. I read as much as I could about the organization so that I would understand exactly what I was getting into. It's a state police organization, so we're a rural policing agency. We're not necessarily, we do come in and support into urban areas, but for the most part, we're a rural police agency. But, nowadays in 2020, rural and urban is all starting to bleed together, but that's fine. Right. But read up as much as you can. Secondly, seek out someone in law enforcement that you can go and speak to that's going to give you the real, okay? Be very candid with you and ask you tough questions. And if you were to come into my office and say, hey, I want to be a state trooper, I'm going to ask you why. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you can give me, I want to help people and I want to serve people. And I'm all, yeah, okay, that's great. But really, why? Right. And it's okay if you tell me, hey, y'all make, starting salary is this and the benefits are that. But when you're talking about potentially being out on the streets, and this is a job where you can give a life and take a life, I really need to know what your why is. And you do too. Yeah. What is your why? Okay. And then I guess my fourth thing is figure out, if you're prepared to go into an agency, not necessarily Madison, but most others that are 90% male, and even more so 90% white male, in the climate that we are in right now. I still say yes. I would still say yes. I would say yes over and over again. Right. But I need you to be mentally prepared, because it's going to be very stressful and it's going to be very taxing on you. And then let's talk about the physical. We didn't even get into that. We need you to be in shape. We need you to take care of your bodies, eat well, exercise. And it's not just because, we want you to look good in uniform. When you take care of your physical, your mental comes with it. Mm-hmm. You're going to be sometimes you'll be out in the road and it's so boring. You're just like, oh my God, I can't wait for this shift to be over. And then just before your shift ends, you get into a pursuit that ends into a foot chase and then a barricaded gunman, and it's 100 degrees outside and you're laying out there behind cover hoping that you don't get shot. Mm-hmm. So those are the things that I need you to be considering when you consider law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And then finally, if you have family, make sure you think about them too. Mm-hmm. Because when you become a law enforcement officer, it's not just you that becomes a law enforcement officer. Mm-hmm. Your entire family goes through this with you. Absolutely. What do I mean by that? Law enforcement officers, we're different. We don't put too much much of our information out. Our friendship circles get very, very small. Mm-hmm. We are very, very much so. We never really have an off switch. Sad to say, we never really have an off switch. What does that mean? That means that even though I may have a day off and I want to go spend it with my family on the beach or in a park, the whole time, you know, my ears are going. I'm looking around, and you're trying to figure out, why won't I relax? Hey, calm down. We're just out here. You're on your day off. Mm-hmm. We're never really off. Right. We're never really off. Absolutely. So those are all the things I want you to consider. When you're choosing someone to speak to, don't just find somebody that's just going to answer a couple emails that you send them. You want somebody that really will engage you and bring you into their office or meet you for lunch or something and have a solid conversation. And you know what that means. I don't have to explain that to you. You really want someone that has a vested interest in you. Absolutely. I do really appreciate you mentioning the why. You know, what is your why? I think people sometimes join opportunities or be, you know, part of opportunities. I mean, any opportunity, Delta Sigma Theta, you know, going into corporate America, going into, you know, law enforcement, going into higher education. And sometimes they're not really understanding their own why they're pursuing that. And so I think that is real critical for people to pause a little bit and really think through the why before they approach any new opportunity, especially something so critical as law enforcement. So I definitely appreciate you giving that tip. It may sound corny, but law enforcement is definitely for service. Okay, let me say that again. Becoming a law enforcement officer is about service. It is not about being able to talk to people any way you want to, being able to dominate or bully people. That's not what it's about. It's about service. You are the person that they call when they can't think of anybody else to call. And so when you get there, you are supposed to provide a service. That's it. And if you can't go in thinking that, or if you think about a certain segment of the world or community in a negative light, then you need to rethink it. Mm-hmm. Because you can't go into this profession thinking that a certain segment of community deserves what they get because of. No, you cannot. Mm-hmm. We treat everybody with dignity and respect. And that's what we're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. You know, I've seen it on social media here recently, and I'm sorry, I'm very passionate about this, but I've seen it in social media here recently where, you know, where people are saying they took all these oaths, and I have a soror that gets on me all the time. How many oaths did you take, Kristal? But we take these oaths, and you need to be you need to have that come out of your pores when you take these oaths. Yeah. That you will treat people with dignity and respect, regardless of race, color, creed, or consideration. It is important. It is very important that we do that. And when you decide to become a law enforcement officer, it doesn't just happen during your shift. That is 24/7. This is what that job is about. Absolutely. Well, you guys heard it here first. Major Kristal Turner Childs just dropped some major pearls on you. So y'all need to write this down. Rewind this tape. You got to rewind it, pause it, do what you need to do because you heard it here first. So, so this is our lightning round, Kristal. We're about to jump into some real controversial questions, some statements. Now,
You know, some of it is controversial to some, not to others. It's just common sense things. Some of these things you might want to just say, it's too controversial. Let's pass that. But we got 20 seconds. I'm going to toss 5 things to you. You're going to just respond the first thing that comes to your mind. And let's see how controversial they really get. So are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay, the first one, defunding the police.
Well, let me just say this. I am not against incorporating mental health professionals, probation professionals, even healthcare professionals to augment law enforcement, okay? But I do believe that there's always going to be a need for law enforcement, police officers in general. That's my belief. But I am not against, matter of fact, I wholeheartedly accept help from others that are more equipped to help us to handle, especially mental health situations, especially health situations, probationary situations. I've worked with probationary officers myself on certain details as well. So, you know, when you say defund, you know, I get what you're saying, and I've read about it and I understand it. So I don't get afraid where you're thinking that you're going to be taking away from, taking funding away from police entities. I don't believe that's the case. What I believe is it's augmenting partnerships with police agencies so we can do our jobs better.
Awesome. Good response. What about woman officer presence reduces violence?
Oh, that's a fact. That's an absolute fact. Let me just say that. Listen, I'm just going to brag on women. Listen, we have this unique ability. When we show up, we're communicators, we're nurturers. It comes out of our pores. And when we show up, we de-escalate situations. We hear, we're good listeners. Listen, women, we can change policing. We can change the way the policing goes. You know, if we would just get more of us in, you know, 15% nationwide is not enough, y'all. So if you want, come on board. I'm close to the end of my career. And certainly I would love to have you.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's the next one. Is the term de-escalation overused and confusing?
I believe it is. I think that, you know, de-escalation, it sounds good. It got a whole lot of flowers on it and all that other stuff. I think if we just broke it down to what I said earlier in the interview, hear what people want to be heard. And it doesn't cost us any extra money or any extra time for us to hear what somebody has to say in situations. We don't necessarily listen. You know, when I was out training people and I was a coach, if a situation merits that someone broke the law and we have to effect an arrest, then we have to effect an arrest. But what does it kill me to listen to whomever's being arrested in their story? It doesn't hurt me at all.
Absolutely.
If you think about it, if you put yourself in the shoes of others, you will definitely be a lot more empathetic to their situations. And if you keep that at the forefront of your mind in everything that you do, let me remove whatever biases or anything that I have in my mind and put myself in this person's shoes, then I think that will help us all in all situations.
That's great. Great advice. What about immigration and sanctuary laws? Immigration and sanctuary laws. Do you think those are under control or a big mess?
I think it's messy. I think it's messy. I am, you know, I'm grown and I love children. And I believe that, yes, there are rules to how immigration works and how people come into it. But I think that needs to be looked at as well. I think that needs to be reformatted and refocused. There's a reason why, you know, there must be something great about wanting to be here. If people are trying to get here any way that they can. People are leaving situations where their families are being, you know, wiped out. And they want to come to a place where the land of opportunity. I get that. If again, putting myself in their shoes. But I do believe that immigration and all those things need to be looked at and reworked in some manner.
Awesome. And here's my last one, my last controversial. Officers should live in the community that they serve.
Yes. Absolutely. Listen, I live, becoming a Pennsylvania State Trooper, I only had to live in the state of Pennsylvania. But when you leave, they pull you out and you're driving an hour and a half or 2 hours away. It only makes sense that you live in that area. Why? If you live in the area, you begin to learn the area. You learn the people. You learn a lot just by living in the area. And what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Get into the city and connect with the people that you serve.
Well, thank you so much. This was so much fun.
I'm just with you, girl.
I know, I'm thinking, wait a minute, we need to go and do this little, workshop out here, because we got some pearls we drop in. But this was great. We don't get a chance to chop it up much, but when we do, it's really powerful, and I appreciate it. I appreciate you dedicating some time.
Listen, love Miss Tina. She was wonderful to me when she met me as a brand new trooper. She, I remember her putting her hand on my shoulder and said, "Now this is what you do. This is what you don't do." So she's a mentor too. Yes.
Well, I appreciate you, and I know she's smiling down on us, kind of like, she probably saying, "No, that's not how you ask the question."
Oh, I'm sure she got a few cents to put in.
So. Exactly. Well, thank you, Kristal. Thank you for your time, and I want to thank the listeners out there. Thank you for tuning in. I know you've been riding this wave with me, all of these series, but this one, of course, is so much. It's just something about this series that's really, really, really touching my heart, and so I want to thank you, listeners, for tuning in. If you want more information about Major Kristal Turner Childs, just look below. I have a link for you. If you want more information about the studies that we referenced earlier today, especially you men out there in law enforcement, we need you to read this study. If there was something that you heard today that energized you or triggered additional questions, please remember to comment below, like, share, and subscribe, and join us again next time for part 2 of Women and Badges. I want to remind my listeners to be safe, practice social distancing, and if you don't want to wear a face covering for you, wear it because you care about others. Please remember to go out in your community and embrace someone. They are waiting for you. Continue to live your absolute best life.
Hey. Hello, Embracing Arms community. My name is Major Kristal Turner Childs. I'm with the Pennsylvania State Police, and I'm a community advocate. I am stopping by to remind you to live your best life.
Inspire with Nendrix, the foundation. My LaCasa boy, this is my residence. My prescription boy, this is my medicine. The world can be sickening and living in house resemblance. Not to mention the media's effort to keep us in the most simplistic state of mind. Lowest age bracket committing the highest rate of crime. People dying way before they hit their age of prime. Thinking success only happens if they shoot hoops, move cane or rhyme. Peek through these blinds, over the porch and into these streets. You see why protective moms keep their daughters out of reach from activities. Sure to have them 6 feet deep under the grounds where our local dope dealers meet.